Good evening. Tonight we're speaking with Bert, Crenca, who has operated AS220 here in Providence, Rhode Island for the last 6 years. And, well, I suppose the first question I have to ask Bert is, how do you do it?
How do we do it? How do we run AS220? How do we book AS220? Well, AS220 is on 2 floors in downtown Providence, and it's primarily made of a performance space, some gallery space, and studios. There are 10 artists that have studios here. The performance program is totally eclectic. We do everything from rock and roll to poetry to whatever comes along with original theater. The only stipulation is that whatever is done here has to be original. It has to be created by the people that perform it. Well, it has to be original. It can't be copyrighted material per se, unless they've copyrighted it. We've been here 6 years. The reason we set the place up was to create a venue for Rhode Island artists to do whatever it is they do in a completely unjuried format. Whether you be a visual artist or a performance artist or a musician, poet, dancer, we wanted to create some sort of a forum where people could do their thing without going through a lot of the traditional kinds of hassles that they do, trying to get opportunities in traditional institutions if you're not a known commodity. No matter what the medium is, it's always the same kind of problems. Whether you're a visual artist or a rock and roll musician, doesn't matter. As far as groups from out of town, we have a little bit of a different policy in terms of booking. We had to make some sort of arbitrary determination about how we're going to handle the booking, because it would be impossible to have a completely unjuried space and service, say, the whole region that way. There's just not enough time to do that. So what we decided with people from outside of the state of Rhode Island, if they're bringing something interesting that we feel would be beneficial to the audiences or other performers here, then that's one potential criteria for allowing them to perform here. If they sell me a package, if they have an idea or a concept that I feel would be interesting, they could have a 4-band package that comes from Boston or New York or something, and for some reason or other, we have confidence that the music is interesting and that it's going to bring people out, then we'll do it. National, international acts that may be touring and they're looking for an off night to fill in, and Providence falls between Boston and New York. A lot of times they'll be very agreeable, and if people know who they are, we feel confident that they'll come out on an off night, we can generally work something out. Monetary rewards here are very limited. I mean, it's difficult as it is to find a place to do original material and get paid for it is, that much more unusual. But what we do, generally the way things work is we take half the door and then the rest of the door goes to whoever's performing that night. We try to be as just as we can in the way we handle that. Sometimes we'll make guarantees to specific groups or bands or performers. If you're doing Eugene Chadbourne or somebody like that, who's played through here a number of times, for example, or Fred Frith, I mean, you're not going to tell Fred Frith he's going to get half the door. You definitely have to, you contract some sort of arrangement with people like that. That's basically how we book. Now, a lot of times bands will be, I may say no the first couple of times they're from out of town, but they're so damn persistent, that in itself to me says that they deserve an opportunity if they're that persistent. I mean, one of the problems with booking unknown groups from out of town is that generally what they're doing is they're capitalizing on the audience of local groups, and they're also taking part of that door from the local groups. You have to weigh out what's fair and what's just. If those opportunities are reciprocated in other towns, sometimes we'll do things like that. If we know a band is coming from Washington or New York or Boston, and these are people who have provided opportunities for bands from here in a kind of unstated exchange program, like we've done with the Middle East on a number of occasions. Bands have come here, someone, yourself or Chris or somebody has called me and said, listen, we got somebody, we do something, and on the other hand, you have been more than open to things that have come out of Providence. Well, those kinds of things, generally will work out one way or another. That's basically how it is, how the booking situation goes. We're a nonprofit. We don't serve liquor. Uh, just how much money we make at the door. We definitely have, a lot of bills that we have to take care of, just like anybody else. We have a lot of financial responsibilities, insurance, and all those kinds of stuff that are encumbrances on, being open generally. I mean, the financial aspect of operating a program like this is usually what causes people to be selective about who they put on, who's going to draw, and who ain't going to draw. Well, that's not as much of a problem for us. We definitely have to make money on the weekends here, but it balances out. We can do a poetry night and only make a few dollars, but the next night we got 5 hardcore bands and we make up for it in one way or another. So generally, in the course of a month, it balances out and we end up managing to make our expenses. We only have one paid staff person here, and that's me, and I make minimum wage based on a 40-hour week. So I take home $130 or something a week. The reason why we had to establish a full-time paid staff person is because we're nonprofit and we apply for grants. And most granting agencies require that the agency applying has at least one full-time paid staff person. So the way we sort of accomplish that is by creating a position based on the government standard of minimum wage and on a 40-hour week. So that legally, there's no question about the fact that that's a full-time paid staff person. I've known some organizations will pay $10 or $15 an hour to someone who can only afford to employ for 20 hours, and then as a result, they don't really meet the criteria for some foundations and stuff, as opposed to employing at 40 hours a week the same amount of money, say, and say that, it's kind of a constructive manipulation of the, I think.
Accommodationalism.
Yeah, okay.
I should mention that although AS220 doesn't serve alcohol, people can bring alcohol, provided, of course, they stick to the limits of social behavior. And also, to get to AS220, now let's see if I can get this right. I'm really a transplanted Providence type person, but I think once you're in downtown Providence, if you follow the signs to I-195, and then, what's that street, that bridge?
Point Street Bridge.
Yeah, and then go up Point Street, then turn down Richmond Street. You might just find a parking space a block or two away.
That's right.
So that's how you get to AS220. You have a project called Meatballs Fluxus. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Well, Meatballs Fluxus is something that started about 5 years ago, and it was originated myself and a man named Manuel Pome. We just started as a kind of just improvisational duet to do whatever we wanted to do. And that concept lasted about 2 weeks, and then we took on a third person. And then that person left, and we got another person, and that other person came back, and now the group is about 8 or 9, I think, people are involved in it. It still kind of goes through changes. And every time they perform, originally they performed here every Saturday and did new material. They were like one of the acts that would perform on a regular basis on Saturdays, which would sort of give some continuity to the Saturday program, much like you do with your open mics at the Middle East, and it gives it some sort of continuity from week to week. And they would do new material all the time. Since then, they only perform here now once a month. I've also gone on tour in they went as far west, I guess, as Madison, Milwaukee, and as far south as Athens, Georgia, Columbia, South Carolina, Memphis, Washington, D.C., and did a small tour that was very enriching, and the experience was great.
Well, was this an aesthetic sort of Stone Wheat Thins type tour, or was it a beer-soaked revelry as you went through all the hot spots down south?
I think it was a combination of the two, depending upon a given situation. If you're playing in the gallery, it's cheese and wine, and if you're playing in the bar room, it's beer and after hours with the locals.
But how do you transport a troupe of that size?
Well, we only took 5 on the road, and what we did is we bought a mini bus, and actually we had some good deals along the way. Places like the Memphis Institute of Contemporary Art, which I don't think exists anymore. It's now defunct. We had a contracted agreement with some of these people like that, and for some places where we didn't do very well or didn't have too much of an agreement, we made up for it. Some other situations, we got a small grant from the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, a travel grant, about $700, which helped pay some of the expense. So it's kind of like AS220, the tour, in the way I generally put things together is sort of really diversify in terms of the kinds of income that you do. I mean, as you know, most small bands and stuff too, I mean, they sell a few tapes here and there, they get a place to sleep, if somebody offers them a meal. I mean, you have to think in a very broad sense in terms of putting those things together, how you're going to finance them. You know, sometimes financing comes in the way of a good place to sleep and a promise of a good meal is part of your payment, and it comes in handy. I mean, we actually slept went in about 5:30 into a trailer camp, or a, what do you call it, park, campgrounds, went in and left before they, we came in late in the morning and left early in the morning before anybody even knew we were there. They just slept on the ground. So that was one night free, But as I say to you with AS220, I mean, we get some money at the door, we get some grant money, we get some inexpensive studio rents. People that have studios here also take on some sort of responsibility towards the place. So automatically they're sort of co-opted into being involved in a very direct way in the operation of the space. One person sweeps, one person makes the calendar, one handles the mailer. So it's a cooperative. And, like I say, the way we support these kinds of things, just like the Meatball Tour, we use a really diversified kind of approach and very open-ended way of financing and supporting these things. So.
And from whence comes the name Meatballs Fluxus?
Meatballs Fluxus, well, first of all, it started off, the name originally was intended to be, by the way, I should mention that the Middle East, yourself and Chris were very friendly to us. For a few months we performed in the Middle East on a regular basis, and it was a good experience.
I still remember party dress, very fun.
Oh, good.
If you don't like that party dress, you can wear bendy suits.
What? That's it. I think we played that song since. Meatballs, it originally was going to be me and Manny at the time, and then he's a Portuguese, I'm Italian Portuguese, and we had a little chip on our shoulder, and we were going to call ourselves Grease Balls. That's the way it started, and everybody reacted very negatively to that. Not that that's bad in itself. So we changed it to Meatballs, added a little humor to it, and then as we expanded the group, we decided to incorporate the idea of Fluxus, which was an art movement, if you don't know already, anybody that's looking at this or interested in this interview, was a movement that occurred predominantly through 60s and early 70s. And it was based primarily in New York, and a guy named George McCunis was the sort of secretary of that movement. He had a gallery in Manhattan. And it was a kind of post-Dada movement. And it did most of its performances primarily, I think, in New York and Germany. And the people that you would be most familiar with would be I think, Neptune Pike, I think, was involved. Also, Yoko Ono, I was like mind block on that. She was involved in some of the performances, and Joseph Boyce was also involved in some of the performances in that movement. And it was a very kind of anti-art, minimalist kind of performance-oriented group. Most of the people had music backgrounds. They mentioned John Cage in a lot of their literature and stuff as one of the inspirations. They were kind of the predecessors in some ways for the happenings of things, and of course what happened in Black Mountain College had some influence on these guys, it's just the continuity of things. But they're kind of a post-Dada, anti-art movement. So I can't say that we epitomize in any way the Fluxus movement, but I can say that we definitely draw a lot of inspiration from their style and approach and the way they present things. They take the most mundane, simplistic, monothematic activity, like brushing your teeth or something, and present it very formally, which is very inspiring to watch sometimes. Our presentations are not always as, say, dry as that in terms of presentation. And we use a lot of, we'll write tunes and things like that, which I don't know if there was much of that kind of thing that happened in the Fluxus movement. It still exists. It still pops up here and there, and it's sort of revitalized here and there. And there are some major collectors and stuff involved in it, and it has found its way into museums. and yet it still never has become like a real popular thing. You know, like Dada, surrealism, and all the manifestations of that sort of really got into the mainstream in a lot of ways. Fluxus never really has become mainstream, although it has been documented, recorded, and it is in museums. So, it's neat.
Well, what do you see in the next 10 years? You know, there's a big boom in Dada's and surrealism right about now. Do you see that continuing on to the 21st century?
Yeah, I think its influence will never ever stop. I mean, the absurdity of it, and it was timeless. I mean, those movements are timeless. I make a big distinction between surrealism and Dadaism, though. I mean, surrealism to me is a very commercialization in my way of thinking, at least. And I'm definitely not a scholar in any of this shit, but the way I look at it, it was very much a commercialization of Dada. And I personally have very little interest in surrealism per se.
You mean like Salvador Dali?
Yeah, although he actually, I mean, if you dig deeper into his history, I mean, he did some pretty out stuff that I find very interesting and provocative, but a lot of the painters and stuff in the surrealist movement, and I don't know how far it went in traditional music and things like that, but I guess there's a surrealist movement in composition, music composition too, but I'm not really that familiar with that. But from the painting, at least from the point of view of painting, I don't have a lot of interest in surrealist painting. It's commercialized and it's stylized, and it has, and I think Dada and the Fluxus movement, stuff like that, I mean, there was a, you know, Dada stylization, stuff like that, I mean, they constantly try to turn that on its head, because stylization is like the first step in commercialization, I guess, in a lot of ways. And so they were always trying to turn that on its head. And I think surrealism is very much stylized by individual artists and stuff, and very much commercialized. You know? So those are very different movements.
So in other words, by its very stylization, surrealism kind of defeats the purpose of Dada.
Right.
Because Dada is just sheer randomness.
Right.
Well, I wonder what, I guess the World War has always been chalked, you know, they've always chalked it up to the World War. Dada, sort of the 20th century was a fragmented century because of the horrors of war. But other eras have had wars, and they haven't produced things like Dadaism.
I don't know about that. You know, so Erroneous Bosch was certainly out to lunch. So, I mean, I'm not convinced that these guys, I mean, even like, for an example, I don't know where he fits historically, but some of the, like Umberto Boccioni, I guess, a lot of his sculptures and stuff that never were all destroyed. And all through history, I think there are probably some artists that were dabbling in absurdity and were always resisting sort of the status quo, that whose work or products probably didn't last, you know, because they weren't commercialized and stuff. But I have a feeling that this kind of resistance has probably existed all through time, that they were Dada cavemen. You know, I'm convinced that that's part of human nature in some sense, that's form of expression. Personally, that's right.
Well, it's a pity because this information explosion that's occurring is putting knowledge into the hands of anybody who seeks it out, and things like body language and a knowledge of mythology, that can be very cruelly subverted and twisted to serve the ends of, you know, powers that be, the status quo. But Dada is almost like a fresh air or something in a sea of salt water.
Right.
Like Arsenio Hall goes like this, you know, it's like assertiveness.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's begging your pardon.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, it's just calculated. All this stuff seems to be calculated now, whereas before, people created myths just because they had this sort of mythopoeic experience they had to transmit. Now it's like, oh, let's see, put Blind King in square A and you have, you know, Vagabond Minstrel in square B.
Right.
You know,
And now you have, right. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I mean, it's in my nature to, every time I'm feeling like pressed by some sort of stylization or repetition, it's in my nature to react to that. I mean, you know, I've watched your performances, and I think you're very the same way. I mean, automatically, if you find yourself falling into a certain pattern, I mean, I have a tendency to want to reject that, or react to that, or respond to that in some way or another. So I don't feel like I'm not denying that I'm not influenced by any of these powers, because they're incredibly powerful, you know. But I know that there's also something inside of me that's constantly trying to react to that and sort of maintain a certain amount of predictability about what I'm involved in, what I do. I think that there's a guy here who performs quite often. He performs in Boston pretty frequently too. What's his name? The monologue guy. Dennis Downing. Thank you, Al. Dennis Downing, he does his monologue. One of the things he talks about is all these radio waves that are in the air constantly, that we're subjected to, that, before radio, or the projection of radio waves, that didn't exist. Now, the human being's environment is completely, dosed with radio waves. And how does that affect us? How does it affect the way we think and we look in our chemistry and our, biochemistry and stuff like that? How does that affect us?
Makes us want to drink a lot of Dos Equis.
Yeah, well, more Dos Equis than ever before, right? But I can't talk now. We'll be videotaping an interview here.
That's all right. It's a pretty casual video.
Oh, okay. Well, I was assuming that, but.
I wanted to ask you some probing personal questions. I'm so fearful I might offending you that I would just leave it in your ballpark.
Yeah.
Well, basically, I'd like to know where you're from,
okay.
how old you are.
41. I grew up in North Providence, which is, anyway, it's a small. It's not north of Providence. It's a separate town, North Providence.
It's not Marieville.
No, it's close though. It is actually. That's part of North Providence. I think it's part of North Providence actually.
And what street?
I came from Warren Avenue off of Pawtucket.
How would you characterize the neighborhood that you were from?
Well, when I was growing up, it was primarily second, third generation Italians, and living in 2-3-decker houses. A few single-family houses, which kept cropping up more and more as time went on. They had a strong community base. People communicated. Of course, I was born in 1950, so I was part of the post-war dream, and benefited from it in a lot of ways. I didn't have much to worry about. Outside of the personal things that we all encounter within our own families and our own growing up and stuff. But
I was just in Marieville and I was trying to get to the Ocean State job lot, and this old woman started screaming at me out of her car. She looked like a hag. She had a babushka on. She screamed, "You drive like an Italian. You're too slow."
Oh, really?
I could not believe. Make up your mind.
Wow.
I could not believe this woman. It's like I inconvenienced her for like 3 seconds, and she's like screaming like some witch out the car window. I never saw anything like it. I grew up in a community very similar to yours. My mind was racing back to Bloomfield and Pittsburgh. Same deal.
Oh, sure,
Second
Pittsburgh,
and third generation Italian, 2 and 3 deckers, single family, strong community base. So I really feel for that, and I have a whole picture of spaghetti dinners at the house.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Your fancy Italian restaurant, and there was always one down the street which wasn't quite so fancy.
Yeah.
And the bars, and just
a lot of bars.
just the whole thing with the
A
Italian.
lot of bars. Most of that, if you're male and you left your house, by the time you were a teenager, you were already hanging out in bars and learning how to play cards and all that, but also athletics. It's the 50s, so athletics and all that kind of stuff. And I had parochial education, Catholic grammar school, Catholic high school.
Where'd you go to school?
The Sal Academy was the high school that I went to for 4 years. No women,
Did you go to St. Edward's?
Pseudo-classic education. No, I went to St. Lawrence.
St. Lawrence, where's that?
In Centerdale.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's just north of there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you took the school bus every day?
No, I walked and I walked to LaSalle too from North Providence. Actually, it was quite a few miles. So I get a ride now and then, I'll walk. It didn't make any difference. Walking wasn't such a bad thing. You could thumb too. Used to thumb a lot. But yeah, that's where I grew up. My father was working class. My father worked in factories his whole life. My mother worked in factories her whole life. They're both alive. I have one brother who's 13 years younger than me. Art was kind of accidental. Getting involved in art from the very beginning was accidental. I was sort of pressed to try to create something in grammar school, and even though the person didn't think I would do it, because I was a bit of a discipline problem. So she tried to find alternative ways to involve me, and art was one of them. I got interested and worked hard at it. And then I left it for years and years, and then came back to it later on in life, and then got really deeply involved on my own in trying to self-teach myself, to teach myself how to paint, and got involved in art history, went to Europe, you know, spent months traveling in Europe, going to museums, and, you know, I mean, it's a pretty typical kind of story. I mean, there's a lot of young people that go through that same sort of journey. And then later got involved in music, started trading my paintings for flute lessons, started learning how to read music and stuff. Then went back to college and got a degree in liberal arts and fine arts stuff. So formalized it. And then went back to Europe, this and that. And the other thing, I was married for 11 years, I got divorced. I lived in a place called the New England Center for Contemporary Art in Brooklyn, Connecticut, worked with a man named Henry Reisman for a while. That was a good experience. I went to Europe. Again, I was back and forth to Europe a few times. Did an exhibit in Europe, came back, had a few bucks left, tried another program similar to this with the help of a very wealthy man. That didn't work out too well. Then I took the last few dollars I had and started it on my own with the help of a guy named Scott Seabold and Susan Clausen. Susan is a woman that I live with and who is still deeply involved in AS220 and helping maintain the space. And that was 6 years ago. We started this with $800 and a little manifesto that we put out on the street. Charged $1, it was in a different building to get into the performances, and basically stated that we were providing an opportunity for anybody to do whatever it is that they wanted to do. And the idea has caught on, you know. You never know what you're going to see here. You never know if you're going to like it, you know. But nevertheless, it has, I think, a very important, powerful function. Especially the way society has gone with the new conservatism and you know, all these questions about censorship, these idiotic issues, which is such an awful waste of time, I think, even though it gets people conversing about these things and debating them, which is good, I guess, in some sense. And that's the only credit we can give to Jesse Helms, is this. He's got people talking and arguing and debating about these issues, which is good. You want to hope that, you know, I don't know how to put it, I mean, that some open-mindedness will come out in the end of the process, the end result of that. Who knows? I mean, yeah, I mean, as you know, Fran, I mean, you look at history and there's cycles and cycles and cycles of things, and you can see things repeated over and over again. You know, even with the economy, you know this thing's going to bottom out, and then there's going to be new speculation, new entrepreneurship. The whole thing's going to, it's going to recycle again. I don't know if that gives you a positive feeling or makes you feel more depressed, but AS220 is going to try and capitalize on that in its own way. We're trying to work a lot of situations to buy our own building, so that when we come out of this depression, AS220 will come out of it secure with its own building. And then when all the speculation starts all over again, and artists start getting driven out of the spaces that they occupy that no one else would occupy, they won't be able to do that to us at the end of this. And that's what we're trying to do. And I'd like to see other artists do the same thing, start working together in co-ops and whatnot, buying their own spaces now that the space is affordable, now that it's a buyer's market, and secure their future for when this changes again. You know, that's what I hope more artists do. And we want to create a little model of that and help other people figure out how to do that if possible.
That's funny. That's what Peter Orlovsky said to me about 12 years ago. Buy land.
Yeah?
Yeah, he was touring with Allen Ginsberg, and I saw him in passing. You know, Allen, he was talking to folks after the show. And I talked to Peter, because no one wanted to talk to him for some reason. And so he said, buy land. I think it's very wise and prudent advice. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your weekly events here. Like, I know that every Tuesday night you have films by Robert Jazz.
We're putting a new film, so that ended and we'll start again in January, I think it is. We had to revise that because we were renting most of our films from the Brown Film Library. They have Brown University has an enormous film library. And for some reason or another, they decided they're not letting films off campus anymore, which to me was very disappointing. I mean, I haven't had the time to rally against it. And a sense, or challenge it, but should be challenged. As a university who should be involving itself in making things available to the community, and suddenly we got cut off. So it becomes, that was very inexpensive, very affordable. And now to rent films, as you probably know, through catalogs and stuff, is very expensive. So we're trying to, we've put a new series together, and we're going to try and get some patronage for it, so that we can present art films and sort of classic experimental films and things like that. Again, plus original films. What we want to make very much a part of our series from now on is open up every film evening with an original film, local, regional film. And start giving local people more exposure to film. We don't have a video projector, or we would do more with video. And just presenting video on monitors is not very appealing generally to audience. So unless it's an installation or something you can experience and walk away from, you know. So part of our projections in terms of development of the things that we want to do is to get a video projector, get more involved in video as well. Because we know a lot of people, obviously, because it's affordable and whatnot, are getting into video more and more and more. As we're sitting in front of a video camera, making these things possible. So, and I don't even know if I'll let you ask me a question.
Yes, that covers Tuesday nights, but there's so much happening in AS220 virtually every day of the week. For example, Fridays.
Friday nights is, we call it Sound Happenings, and it's hosted by Major Hemisphere, which is his alias. It's Chris Adams, who's a profoundly creative musician, local musician who's been involved in a number of projects. And he hosts Friday nights, and generally that's where we feature. It tends to be mostly rock and roll, although we try to diversify as much as possible, even on Fridays. But it's a lot of rock and roll, local and regional, and as you know, like the alternative kinds of groups that will be touring. We had was it Bikini Kill and Nation of Ulysses here about a week ago. So that's usually what happens on Friday. But we also we'll have improvisational groups and experimental bands and electronic things and all that kind of stuff will happen generally on Fridays. Saturdays is under the umbrella of what we call the Cabaret Out of the Normal, hosted by Sagai de Portugee. And that's as eclectic as possible. We try to get poets, monologue artists, and we want more of that. More and more diversity on Saturdays. Ideally, we hope to evolve the format to the point where it's like 20-minute pieces, whether it be music, monologue, or less, 20 or less. And I think you're well experienced in this. It's nice to keep it short, sweet, and moving in a traditional kind of cabaret format. That's really what but kooky. You know, that's what we would like to see ideally. Thus, cabaret, the art of normal. That's what we always intended. And some nights it's like perfectly that. And the place is packed, and the stuff moves along, and there's a tremendous diversity of stuff, and it's very fulfilling. And you know, I'm of the opinion that 5 minutes of anything on earth is interesting. You know, once you get over 15, you're already pushing the limits of people's, you know, concentration, endurance, patience, right? But boy, if we could get all performers to perform for 5 minutes, none of them would ever fail. I don't care how bad it is. You know, it still can be interesting and inspiring in a lot of ways. I think that I've been more influenced by bad performances than I have been by good. I really, really think that that's true in some ways.
Well, yeah, you could transpose it to virtually any milieu, like say a carpenter. Well, that's how not to bevel a joint.
Right, exactly. That's right. Of course. You know, and yet sometimes some of the people that generally the majority of people thought were bad are the people that we've talked about the most, that were the most provocative in some way, you know. So,
you know, like Thomas Hardy's Jude Obscure, there's a very bizarre incident in which his son hangs himself and his stepbrothers and sisters, and leaves a little note that says, "Done because we are too many." And, you know, and I said to my professor, that's patently Malthusian. I mean, he's sticking his indoctrinization impulses into the novel. Yes, but you remember it.
Right.
And you know, sometimes artists are cynical, but I think maybe that cynicism might have something to do with the way in which they can see how something is put together. and
Yeah.
other folks can't. So
Yeah.
if you go to a movie and you know how plots work, then you know that something's really contrived and just stuck in there, and you're not going to like it. But if you're not oriented that way, you'll just let it wash over you as entertainment.
Yeah, oh no, I agree with you totally. I agree with you totally. And it's really important, I think, as an artist to sort of somehow to resist that. Even though it's inevitable, the more knowledgeable you become about your craft or other people's craft in the arts, you're right. I mean, you definitely become jaded knowing the inner workings of it. But you gotta work on that, you know. And I do that to myself by like putting people like, you know, you have a lot of young people that gravitate to the space, and a lot of times I'll put them in positions unexpected to them, where I'll say, do you know you guys are booked Friday? Well, we don't do anything. Well, you're booked. I mean, you got to do. And inevitably, they come up with something interesting to do, you know, under the pressure of the situation. And that's one of my ways of sort of fighting my own sort of jaded, you know, attitudes that I've developed, like you're saying, you know, through knowing too much about, you know, the making of stuff, I guess. But yeah, I agree. You got to work on that.
Because experience tends to close your mind. You tend to avoid situations where you think it might not be productive. But when you're first starting out, you don't really have the mastery of technique or craft to utilize all of the experiences that you encounter. And as you get older, you have so much craft that, you know, you tend to be lazy. But you can't. You just got to keep that fire burning.
Yeah.
Now, do you have something offered regularly on Sunday nights here at AS220?
No, all the rest of the nights, often enough something will happen on Sunday, or even on other nights during the week. Generally, the big space is used for rehearsals. Meatballs Fluxus rehearses here twice a week. There's a band of one of the artists that rehearses here once a week. We also have recording projects that are ongoing here. The space is used as a recording studio. There's a small engineering booth hidden away in one of the back rooms here. We bring cables out, and Joe Walker, who's the engineer, who's doing all the recording, probably has some compilations coming out that will be coming out in another month or two. We plan to develop our recording resources and stuff here and make that a more important part of what happens at AS220, because as you know, documentation and stuff like that is I don't know if I want to say important.
It's a luxury that you can afford.
Thanks. I don't want to, yeah. But things will happen. This weekend, for example, we have a play that will be running Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night at 8 o'clock. So it's a short run of a local person's original play.
Every now and then you do have something like that.
Right. Well, we've had a number of classical recitals, say, on Sundays. We've had fundraisers on Sundays for different organizations, not just this one. We also try to make this place as accessible to other nonprofits and causes. And, you know, even though I tend to be somewhat apolitical in my dealings with people, of course it's unavoidable that you know, obviously political in some way or another, but when you wake up in the morning. But there's a lot of different kinds of causes and activities that we support by making the space available to people. You know, I think most venues do that to some degree or another anyway. But
Now, what's this about, a compilation?
there's a compilation, AS220 compilation tape that should be out hopefully by the end of December, which has, I think, 19 different acts represented that have performed or developed here at AS220. Not necessarily all of them have developed here. Some of them definitely have developed here. That's one compilation that will release. I don't even know if it's titled yet. There'll also be Radio Void, the magazine, the people who are involved with that are very closely producing that, are very closely affiliated with AS220. A couple of founding people, the founding person, Brian Gallagher, and a number of his staff are on our board of directors here. They're putting out a compilation tape, which has some of the same people on it and some others, but it's more oriented towards spoken word and stuff and tape that they'll be putting out.
What sorts of people? John Gray?
John Gray will be on it. Example None, who are now located in Chicago. We used to perform here regularly, a kind of performance duet. Meatballs Fluxus will be on it. Stephen Joe, who's a local performer, is very involved in a lot of different activities. We'll have some original material on it. Small Factory is on it. They're a local band that's doing pretty good now.
That's on the AS220 compilation, as opposed to
some of that's, I don't know which is which now.
Okay.
I'm so confused, there's so many people involved, so it's out of my hands, so I really don't know. You will have to see when it comes out who's what.
Where will these be made available?
I think they're gonna really work hard at distribution. I think that's, I don't know yet. I think still, but there will definitely be some of it will be available in some places in Boston as well as in Providence. And they're really gonna work on distribution.
I would guess Newbury Comics in your ear, perhaps?
Oh yeah, definitely those places. And also Fast Forward, you know, I love mentioning because I'm in love with those people in that place and what they're doing and what they've contributed to the local scene in their way. And they've promoted some shows here that have always been successful.
Fast Forward is a local record store on the east side of Providence. And who's the fellow that runs that?
Well, it's Judy and Ron.
Oh.
And most of them were actually transplants. I mean, they were located in Boston, and very active in the alternative music scene in Boston, and then moved to Providence and have been a tremendous asset to this community.
And back when your store was on Wickenden Street, also on the east side, they would have bands performing in that tiny, cramped place every now and then. But now I guess
And neat.
they have AS220 and they can...
And they still do things there. They'll still put on something impromptu from somebody touring or something and have a tape or a record signing or a little performance or something like that, you know. So they still use the space that way.
I'd like to ask where you think performance artists and performance art is heading in the next few years. There's this big flap about a performing art duet down in New York who dress in blue body costumes. And it seems as though performance art, once widely loathed and ridiculed, is gaining some sort of mainstream acceptance. Do you see this like happening in the next 5 or 10 years?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's heading more towards entertainment. You know, I think that performance art has helped revitalize the way we look at entertainment. You know, I think that in the last couple of decades, maybe we've been lulled, you know, through a lot of bad presentation of TV and performance and music. I mean, how much stuff is out there that is, you know, so commercialized and so polished, and I think performance art, even in its bad times, was attempting at the very least to stimulate again, and to provoke your imagination and your intellect and stuff like that, much like oral tradition and some of the other traditions in performance. You know, so much imagination obviously has been taken out of, so much of you as individual imagination has been taken out of the presentation, in the presentation of entertainment. It's been so complete and bland in many ways. And I think performance art has revitalized that in some ways. And I think that we're going to see the effects of that more and more as it comes online. And the popularization of people like Spalding Gray and that, and what's her name? What the hell's her name?
Laurie Anderson?
Laurie Anderson. I mean, she was one of the first ones to make the pop scene, I guess. I mean, I'm not really good at the history of this stuff, and I know that you are.
No, I'm not either.
But you know, I just think that it's just more towards, it's going to go more towards entertainment. I think we're going to like the whole revitalization of vaudeville, which is in one way or another is being revitalized in pockets all over the world. Cabarets in places like you know, what were at one time called communist block countries and things like that, and Hungary and places like that, where they have small cabarets where they mob the places. You know, I think that more performance art kinds of things would be popping up in these kinds of venues and stuff, and adding more vitality to the whole kind of entertainment scene in a sense. But entertainment is always, by artists, kind of always been sort of like a bad word.
Because,
you know,
I guess an artist might suspect that entertainment has a moral message to push. That's not always the case. Some entertainment is totally free of any agenda. I guess artists are very conscious about being propagandists.
Yeah.
You know, because that's a subversion of art.
Right.
And so entertainment by the same status quo is also a subversion, but you can take that too far.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I don't mean that. When I use the word entertainment, I have a new idea about that in my head. You know, I think like Meatloaf Fluxus is trying more and more, as well as be provocative, to recognize a sense of responsibility towards the audience that they're performing to, and that this audience, even if it means doing something outrageous to them or at them, that's done with a sense of, with consciousness, with a sense of responsibility to involve this audience and maybe give them something to think about when they leave. Now, that's entertainment, and that's entertainment to me. That's entertaining me, you know. And I think, like I say, again, performance art is really, you know, these people like, who's the woman that does the sex performance and, what's her name?
Oh, I know who you mean, Lisa Suckdog.
No, not Lisa. Actually, I wish I had seen her. She was supposed to play here, and for one reason or another, it never happened. But there's another one that does one of her performances is called The Sex Lesson or something. And she was, there was a lot of controversy about her because Helms, I guess, and his crew said that they had given her an NEA grant. She never received a grant in her life, so that was all bullshit anyway. I can't think of her name. But anyway, I mean, she does this really outrageous performance where she takes a transsexual on stage naked and is pointing to body parts and discussing things. But still, no matter how you look at it, there's an overriding entertainment value to what she's presenting, and I think she's very conscious of that, you know. And yet, it's very provocative and very outside and stimulating in ways that a lot of people would rather not discuss, you know. But in fact, it's entertainment, and I think the influence of people like her is going to be really, you know, it's really going to have an impact on the way things are presented, and hopefully it'll be, you know, add some more stimulation to what we've been fed in the last few decades.
So do you look at this as being a craze like disco, punk, comedy clubs, and then performance art, or is it going to be something which is going to last as long as vaudeville did?
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, it always happens. I know you're right. I mean, I know what you're implying, and it's true. Everything tends to get diluted in the process somehow, but I'm sure that there'll be somebody reacting to that right after it, before it starts, you know. So, but I think we have recognized a kind of phenomenon in the last few decades in relationship to performance art. There was, I mean, the Café Voltaire and Tristan Czar and them people, I mean, that was a long time ago, and it was performance art, you know, I mean, there's no doubt about it. And you can go back and back and back, and those people who consider themselves performance art historians can find stuff that happened with the Greeks and the Romans, and you can go into the Eastern cultures, and you can find rituals and ritual traditions and myths and stuff, treatment of mythological treatment, traditions and things that very much could easily be mixed media performance art presentations. You know, so there's not necessarily anything new about it, but I think in Western culture in the last couple of decades, there has been, since we drew away from painting and the visual arts, I think, in art history, which was such a tremendous focus and was such a tremendous, so much time and energy and type was given to painting for so long, that some of the performance art things were more in the background, got a lot of less attention. And when painting died in, say, the late 60s or so, late 60s and 70s, performance art sort of just surfaced and started to take the limelight. I think you might see a revitalization in two-dimensional art too. I don't know where it's going to come from, you know, but I suspect that might, you know, there may be a new heyday on the horizon for the visual arts, you know, in my impression.
Performance art taketh away, maybe it'll give back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can almost see like performance art jumping off of a minimalist canvas from the 70s. Like, there's nothing there anyway, so let's put it in three-dimensionality.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Sure.
I wanted to ask you what you had planned for AS220 at the end of this year, January, December 31st. Do you have a big New Year's show, New Year's Eve?
We have actually we do. We have a great, I'm glad you asked about it. We have a really dynamite New Year's Eve show. It's going to be $7. It's going to be all of the above, so to speak. It's going to be meatballs, fluxus, example none, are coming in from Chicago for the holidays. They're going to be performing, and they are tremendous. It's going to be Eric Armour is going to do a 20, 30-minute presentation of traditional Scottish bagpipes. He's one of the country's best bagpipe players, and he's kind of our resident bagpipist, which I'm proud to say that we have resident bagpipers. That's awesome. We're going to get them in the rock and roll bands and everything, you know? But we're also got the Neo-90s Dance Band, which is a funky original band that evolved out of AS220, and it's dynamite. And after Neo-90s Dance Band, we're going to show the movie Barbarella. And BYOB, and you can come in for $7 at any point during the evening and enjoy whatever's left. And I tell you, it's going to be a really worthwhile night. So,
What do you have lined up for January?
oh, I don't even know the calendar. I don't have it memorized, but when we get the calendar, I can tell you. I could do that.
Okay, well, let's go and get the calendar, so we'll take a break.
All right.
And we'll end up to conclude by coming attractions.
A litany of coming attractions, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, we got the January schedule, AS220, and the first Friday of January, the 3rd, Ron Anderson, six dancing women, and Altered Minds, all kinds of rock and roll stuff, I guess. And on Saturday, all solo acts, local young guys who are getting started here at AS220, Tom Grayson, Matt Obert, Ian Lefty Lacombe, Eric Armour, and Kevin Sullivan. And on the 10th, another Friday, we got Zipperheads, Dr. Junior, Resistance, and Tree, the return of Tree, as a matter of fact, from a sabbatical. And on Saturday, the 11th, Dennis Donnie, the monologuist, who's outstanding in the Campbell Soup Band, was sort of theatrical with some music. The 17th, just bands or people or individuals from Plainville, Mass. That's what we're featuring. And that's some bands like Flower Gang, Drop Dead, Jeepers Crow, and Alec K. Redfern, the accordionist in Joe McCarthy's Ghost, all from or really close to Plainville. 18th, which is a Saturday, Ed Kim does a monologue called Kamikaze, and Paula Feldman does some solo work on the piano, and Kim Trusty with the KMS group. That's jazz, original stuff. The 24th, the Laurels, Laughing Academy, Common Ailments of Maturity, Euthanasia. 25th is Saturday. That's our big night, the last Saturday of the month night. The place is always packed, and we have a ball, and that features Meatballs Fluxus, the Neo-90s Dance Band, and also Carolyn Martino does a monologue, which is going to be wild. So, and 31st, the last Friday of the month of January, U.S. Steel and Contour Limits. That's it for January, and we don't really have much happening on Sundays as of yet.
Well, Mr. Bert Crenca, will you tell us the address of AS220 once more?
AS220 is located on 71 Richmond Street in Providence, Rhode Island. Our number is 401-831-9327, and we're right upstairs from Club Babyhead. Our front door is yellow and black stripes.
And this concludes the interview with Bert Crenca, and you are tuned to Cafe Cabaret. We will return to our usual programming.